Hello friends, welcome to International Law series of policy-based Loksewa. On this episode, I am presenting the Declaration on the purposes and principles and the role of the non-aligned movement in the present international juncture. So let's begin. 14th Summit Conference of Heads of State or Government of the Non-Aligned Movement, Havana, Cuba, 11th to 16th of September 2006, Declaration on the Purposes and Principles and the Role of the Non-Aligned Movement in the Present International Juncture. Part 1, Purposes and Principles. Part 1, Purposes and Principles. 1. The heads of state and government of the non-aligned movement meeting in Havana, Cuba on the 15th and 16th of September 2006 on the occasion of the 14th summit reaffirmed their commitment to the ideals, principles and purposes upon which the movement was founded and with the principles and purposes enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. 2. They affirmed their full conviction that the 14th NAM summit takes place against the backdrop of an extremely complex international situation on a political level. There is a need to promote the goal of creating a multipolar world order based on the respect for the application of the principles of international law and UN Charter and the reinforcement of multilateralism. On an economic level, underdevelopment, poverty, hunger, and marginalization have intensified within the ongoing process of globalization, aggravating the structural imbalances and inequalities that affect the international economic order. The security and well-being of our nations are being challenged as never before. 3. They reaffirmed the mutual reinforcement between development, peace, security, and human rights while stressing the right of people to live in dignity and well-being. 4. They reiterated that the principles and purposes of the NAM continue to be effective and valid. They stated their firm belief that the absence of two conflicting blocs in no way reduces the need to strengthen the NAM as the mechanism for the political coordination of developing countries. Now more than ever, it is essential that our nations remain united and steadfast and are increasingly active in order to successfully confront unilateralism and interventionism. 5. They also agreed that due to the existence of quantitatively and qualitatively more complex challenges than those facing the movement when it was formed, all members must adopt measures to revitalize and strengthen the purposes, principles and structures, mechanisms and working methods of the movement. In this regard, they acknowledged that it remains imperative to strengthen and revitalize the NAM as was agreed during the 13th summit held in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia in February 2003. The Kuala Lumpur Declaration on continuing the revitalization of the NAM continues to be completely effective and valid and represents a fundamental frame of reference for the furtherance of this process. 6. They reaffirmed their political will to strengthen the non-aligned movement. One of their main aims is to ensure that the movement is a dynamic and effective mechanism to coordinate, support, represent, and defend the interests and priorities of its members. To do so, they agreed to strengthen concerted action, unity, and solidarity between all its members based on respect for diversity and sovereignty, factors which are essential for the reaffirmation of the identity and capacity of the movement to influence international relations. 7. They stressed the need to promote actively a leading role for the NAM movement in the coordination of efforts among member states in tackling global threats such as transnational organized crime, the world drug problem, including illicit drug trafficking, trafficking in persons, illicit trafficking in small arms and light weapons, and terrorism through the development of successful strategies in accordance with relevant UN instruments. 8. Inspired by the Bandung Principles and Purposes, which brought into being the NAM during the Belgrade Summit in 1961, the heads of state and government of the member countries of the non-aligned movement meeting in Havana stated that the purposes of the movement in the present international situations are the purposes of the movement in the present situation are: A. To promote and reinforce multilateralism and in this regard strengthen the central role that the United Nations must play. B. To serve as a forum of political coordination of the developing countries to promote and defend their common interests in the system of international relations. C. To promote unity, solidarity, and cooperation between developing countries based on shared values and priorities agreed upon by consensus. D. To defend international peace and security and settle all international disputes by peaceful means in accordance with the principles and purposes of the UN Charter and international law. E. To encourage relations of friendship and cooperation between all nations based on the principles of international law, particularly those enshrined in the Charter of the UN. F. To promote and encourage sustainable development through international cooperation, and to that end, jointly coordinate the implementation of political strategies which strengthen and ensure the full participation of all countries, rich and poor, in the international economic relations under equal conditions and opportunities, but with differentiated responsibilities. G. To encourage the respect, enjoyment, and protection of all human rights and fundamental freedoms for all on the basis of the principles of universality, objectivity, impartiality, and non-selectivity, avoiding politicization of human rights issues, thus ensuring that all human rights of individuals and peoples, including the right to development, are promoted and protected in a balanced manner. H. To promote peaceful coexistence between nations, regardless of their political, social, or economic systems. I. To condemn all manifestations of unilateralism and attempts to exercise hegemonic domination in the international relations. J. To coordinate actions and strategies in order to confront jointly the threats to international peace and security, including the threats of use of force and the acts of aggression, colonialism, and of foreign occupation, and other breaches of peace caused by any country or group of countries. K. To promote the strengthening and democratization of the UN, giving the General Assembly the role granted to it in accordance with the functions and powers outlined in the Charter, and to promote the comprehensive reform of the UN Security Council so that it may fulfill the role granted to it by the Charter in a transparent and equitable manner as the body primarily responsible for maintaining international peace and security. L. To continue pursuing universal and non-discriminatory nuclear disarmament as well as a general and complete disarmament under strict and effective international control, and in this context to work towards the objective of arriving at an agreement on a phased program for the complete elimination of nuclear weapons within a specified framework of time, to eliminate nuclear weapons, to prohibit their development, production, acquisition, testing, stockpiling, transfer, use, or threat of use, and to provide for their destruction. M. To oppose and condemn the categorization of countries as good or evil based on unilateral and unjustified criteria, and the adoption of a doctrine of preemptive attack, including attack by nuclear weapons, which is inconsistent with international law, in particular the international legally binding instruments concerning nuclear disarmament, and to further condemn and oppose unilateral military actions or use of force or threat of use of force against the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence of non-aligned countries. N. To encourage states to conclude agreements freely arrived at among the states of the regions concerned, to establish new nuclear weapons-free zones in regions where these do not exist, in accordance with the provisions of the final document of the first special session of the General Assembly devoted to disarmament, SSOD 1, and the principles adopted by the 1999 UN Disarmament Commission, including the establishment of a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. The establishment of nuclear weapons-free zones is a positive step and important measures towards strengthening global nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. O. To promote international cooperation in the peaceful uses of nuclear energy and to facilitate the access to nuclear technology, equipment, and material for peaceful purposes required by developing countries. P. To promote concrete initiatives of South-South cooperation and strengthen the role of NAM in accordance with G77 in relaunching of North-South cooperation, ensuring the fulfillment of the right to development of our peoples through the enhancement of international solidarity. And then comes Q. To respond to the challenges and take advantage of the opportunities arising from the globalization and interdependence with creativity and a sense of identity in order to ensure its benefits to all countries, particularly those most affected by underdevelopment and poverty, with a view to gradually reducing the abysmal gap between the developed and developing countries. R. To enhance the role of the civil society, role that civil society including NGOs can play at the regional and international levels in order to promote the purposes, principles, and objectives of the movement. 9. In order to realize the aforementioned purposes, the heads of state and government of the member countries of the non-aligned movement, equally inspired by the Bandung principles and the purposes which brought into being the NAM during the first summit in Belgrade, agreed that the actions of the movement will be guided by the following principles. The actions of the movement will be guided by the following principles. A. Respect for the principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and international law. B. Respect for sovereignty, sovereign equality and territorial integrity of all states. B. Recognition of the equality of all races, religions, cultures and all nations, both big and small. D. Promotion of a dialogue among people, civilizations, cultures and religions based on the respect of religions, their symbols and values, and the promotion and the consolidation of tolerance and freedom of belief. E. Respect for and promotion of all human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, including the effective implementation of the rights of peoples to peace and development. F. Respect for the equality of rights of states, including the inalienable right of each state to determine freely its political, social, economic, and cultural system without any kind of interstate interference whatsoever from any other state. The reaffirmation of the validity and relevance of the movement's principled positions concerning the rights to self-determination of peoples under foreign occupation and colonial or alien domination adds to no non-interference in the internal affairs of states. No state or group of states has the right to intervene either directly or indirectly, whatever the motive, in the internal affairs of any other state. I. Rejection of unconstitutional change of governments. J. Rejection of attempts at regime change. K. Condemnation of the use of mercenaries in all situations, especially in conflict situations. L. Refraining by all countries from exerting pressure or coercion on other countries, including resorting to aggression or other acts involving the use of direct or indirect force and the application and/or promotion of any coercive unilateral measure that goes against international law or is in any way incompatible with it, for the purpose of coercing any other state to subordinate its sovereign rights or to gain any benefits whatsoever. M. Total rejection of aggression as a dangerous and serious breach of international law, which entails the international responsibility for the aggressor, and respect for the inherent rights of individual or collective self-defense in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. O. Condemnation of genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and systematic and gross violations of human rights in accordance with the UN Charter and international law. P. Rejection of and opposition to terrorism in its all forms and manifestations, committed by whomever, wherever, and for whatever purposes, as it constitutes one of the most serious threats to international peace and security. In this context, terrorism should not be equated with the legitimate struggle of the people under colonial or alien domination and foreign occupation for self-determination and national liberation. Q. Promotion of pacific settlement of disputes and abjuring under any circumstances from taking part in coalitions, agreements, or any other kind of unilateral coercive initiative in violation of the principles of international law and the Charter of the UN. R. Defense and consolidation of democracy, reaffirming that democracy is the universal value based on the freely expressed will of the people to determine their own political, economic, social, and cultural systems and their full participation in all aspects of their life. As promotion and defense of multilateralism and multilateral organizations as the appropriate frameworks to resolve through dialogue and cooperation the problems affecting humankind. T. Support to efforts by countries suffering internal conflicts to achieve peace, justice, equality, and development. U. The duty of each state to fully and in good faith comply with the international treaties to which it is a party, as well as to honor the commitments made in the framework of international organizations and to live in peace with other states. V. Peaceful settlement of all international conflicts in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. W. Defense and promotion of shared interests, justice, and cooperation, regardless of the differences existing in the political, economic, and social systems of the states on the basis of mutual respect and the equality of rights. X. Solidarity as a fundamental component of relations among nationals in all circumstances. Y. Respect for the political, economic, social, and cultural diversity of countries and people. 10. Guided by these purposes and principles, the heads of state and government of the non-aligned movement acknowledge the pressing need to act as one in a resolute and supportive manner in order to achieve the sustainable development of our peoples, as well as to promote regional and international peace and security. 11. The heads of state and government of the member nations of the non-aligned movement, while acknowledging the importance of global partnership, stress the importance of developing innovative Mechanisms of Cooperation for the Attainment of Sustainable Development, Part 2 Policy Guidelines. Part 2 Policy Guidelines 12, with the aim of creating the proper framework to achieve the aforementioned purposes in accordance with the proclaimed principles, the heads of the state and government of the member nations of the non-aligned movement have agreed the following concrete measures and actions. 1. To focus on issues that unite rather than divide the members of the movement, thereby strengthening its unity and cohesion. 2. To continue making progress in the process of revitalizing and strengthening the movement, including the implementation of the specific agreements and measures adopted in the context of the Kuala Lumpur Declaration on the continuing revitalization of the non-aligned movement. Article 3, to promote multilateralism in international fora and the priorities and principles of the non-aligned movement. 4. To revitalize and reinforce the movement and its ability to achieve concerted positions and to respond efficiently to various events and issues affecting the interests and priorities of its member countries. To this end, the movement's permanent mechanisms should be revitalized and strengthened so that they may function in both a dynamic and effective manner as agreed in the Havana document on methodology. B. To promote concerted actions of the movement within the system of the United Nations, including, whenever possible, joint draft resolutions to be presented to the United Nations General Assembly as well as to other relevant specialized bodies and agencies within the system on issues of common interest to the non-aligned movement, which are consistent with the principles and priorities outlined by the movement and in line with the agreed positions. 6. To systematically update the scope and content of the documents to be adopted in the summits and ministerial conference in order to produce comprehensive and action-oriented texts. The political statements must be concise documents that forcefully put forth the positions of the principles of the movement in fundamental issues of interest to its member countries. 7. To implement the agreed plan of action of the movement. The plan of action must be the object of a continuous follow-up in order to evaluate the implementation and take measures in order to improve and update it. 7. To identify and promote a political agenda in global economic issues of priority interest to developing countries. To revive ministerial meetings devoted to development and economic issues, including trade and finance, given that the Group of 77 basically carries out the functions of coordinating and planning the positions of the developing countries on economic and social issues. The movement must not overlap, duplicate, or try to replace the work of G77 on these issues, but act as a mechanism aimed at supporting and ensuring political definitions of the activities of the G77. 9. To expand and strengthen relations and exchanges as appropriate with other regional and sub-regional organizations in order to ensure that the views of the movement are heard and duly taken into consideration in various fora and levels where discussions are carried out and decisions are taken regarding issues of interest and priority to the non-aligned countries. Thus, it is of fundamental importance to form closer relations with other organizations that represent the interests of the South in order to ensure that the developing countries are coherent and cohesive in promoting and defending their legitimate interests in the international arena. Acts maintain to coordinate the work of the existing mechanisms of the movement in New York, Geneva, Nairobi, Vienna, Paris, and The Hague in the work of the relevant UN organs and agencies upon identifying their respective priority areas of concern and competence, bearing in mind the position of the Coordinating Bureau in New York as the focal point for coordination of the movement. 13. The heads of state and government of the member nations of the non-aligned movement, while acknowledging the important role the movement has played since its inception, expressed their firm conviction that they would continue to make progress towards the attainment of the goals and purposes outlined by the developing countries. Our unity and solidarity is only relevant in if the NAM continues to play an active, important, and constructive role in international relations, so that a more just and equal world order may be achieved. 14. The non-aligned movement, faced with the goals yet to be reached and many new challenges that are arising, is called upon to maintain a prominent and leading role in current international relations in defense of the interests and priorities of its member states. The developing countries will be marginalized if they are unable to define their priorities, share their concerns, and efficiently design their own actions so as to ensure that their interests are taken duly into consideration. Thus, it is imperative that the movement continue to be in the front line in the struggle to change and transform the present unjust international order. Havana, 16 September 2006. So this was the end of the Declaration on non-aligned movement purposes and principles in a changed context. So this is the end. Please do like, share and subscribe this channel for regular updates like this, and goodbye for now.